You have morning sickness. That can't be right. Don't lie just because you're the reason we can't have kids. If you're going to lie, we'll get a divorce.
Husband shouted. I'll get Pete a young wife who can give him lots of children right away. Mother-in-law added. Fine. Please go ahead and have a happy life surrounded by lots of kids. If you can. I am a housewife in my 30s. After graduating from university, I worked as an office lady, where I met Pete in the sales department. We started dating. Pete was cheerful, stylish, and always made our dates enjoyable. After a year and a half of dating.
Fine. Will you marry me?
With a straightforward proposal, I decided to marry him. Pete is an only child and lived with his mother. His father had passed away a few years earlier due to illness.
Fine. After we get married, I want us to live with my mom. She's still grieving from losing Dad and I don't want to leave her alone.
He said this during the proposal. I worried about potential conflicts with my mother-in-law, but when I went to their house to greet her, she was kind and straightforward. FIA, welcome. I made this morning. Would you like to try it? If you're going to marry Pete, you need to learn our family's recipes. She said with a smile. I'd love to learn your cooking. My parents passed away a long time ago, so... My parents had died in a car accident when I was a student, so I had never learned to cook from my mother. My housework skills were all self-taught. I understand your parents have passed away. You can think of me as your real mother. I'm happy to have a daughter since I didn't have one. Encouraged by these words, I agreed to live with my mother-in-law. I thought I could get along well with her. Pete wanted me to be a housewife after we got married. What? But if we both work, we'll have more income and can save up. It's better for our future, right? I told Pete. After all, we would eventually have children, and raising children costs money. So I didn't intend to quit my job right after getting married.
But we won't need to pay rent since we'll live at home. And when we have kids, you won't be able to work. I want to start managing on my own income now. I'll work hard.
He said, so I quit my job thinking I could start working again if needed. Thus began our married life at his family's home. At first, everything went well. My mother-in-law taught me various recipes and how to clean properly. Mother-in-law, who had been a housewife, was very efficient with housework, and I worked hard to keep up. But then she started saying things like, I can't wait to see my grandchild. Since Pete is an only child, it would be nice for him to have siblings. A boy who looks like Pete would be great, and a girl would be adorable too. You must try, FIA. When will this house become lively? It's so dull with just the two of us during the day. Our neighbor just had a baby. I'm so jealous. When will it be our turn? Every day, she would pressure me about grandchildren. At first, I smiled and nodded, but after several months, it became exhausting. I consulted my husband. Pete, your mom is really pressuring me about having kids.
Well, Mom is lonely. When I told her I was getting married, she begged me not to leave her alone.
Wait, that's new to me. Is my mother-in-law unable to let go of her son? I asked my husband. Have you ever lived alone?
No, why?
I suspected my mother-in-law couldn't let go of her son. Will she be able to let go once a grandchild is born? Or am I overthinking this? Anyway, I need her to stop pressuring me about kids. But children are a gift. It's hard for me when she brings it up every day. Can you talk to her?
Okay, I'll talk to her.
He agreed. But later. FIA, don't trouble Pete. What do you mean? Pete is upset about not being able to have children. What? I was taken aback. I never heard my husband say he was upset about not having children. Before we got married, we talked about eventually having kids, but not right away. It was his mother who wanted grandchildren so badly. Feeling confused, I decided to speak up. I think there's a misunderstanding. Pete isn't worried about not having kids. Actually, I was just talking to him about how your pressure is getting to me. What? Are you saying it's my fault? She looked at me with clear disapproval. No, I'm not saying it's your fault. Just that it's a bit of pressure for me. I tried to explain, but she cut me off. Pressure? It's a wife's duty to bear children. What are you talking about? I was shocked by her thinking and couldn't say anything. So, hurry up and have a baby. Only then will you be a proper wife of this family, she said confidently. A proper wife? Does that mean I'm not recognized as one yet? Maybe my husband couldn't tell her to stop because he shares her views. Does he? Feeling uneasy, I told my husband what happened. Pete, I asked you to talk to your mom about stopping the grandchild pressure, but you didn't. Now she thinks you're upset about not having kids and I got scolded. I said.
Well, Mom's thinking may be old-fashioned, but it's not wrong. Couples without children are on the rise, but that's not right. A wife should have kids. That's why I wanted you to be a housewife.
But it doesn't happen immediately after marriage, right?
I know that. I'm hoping we'll have our first child next year.
What? That's news to me. Sure, I thought we'd eventually have kids, but not this soon. From this point, I started feeling distrustful towards my husband and his family. But if a child were born, maybe everything would settle down, and we could become a happy family. If a long-awaited grandchild were born, she would surely dote on them. I thought so, but even after 3 years of marriage, we didn't have a child. Gradually, her attitude towards me became harsher. Hey, FIA, haven't you cleaned the living room properly? Don't slack off. Today's food is bland. You need to follow my instructions exactly. When will you ever learn our family's taste? Her attitude changed 180 degrees from when we first got married. She also became more persistent about the child issue. The lady across the street, who married after Pete, already has a 2-year-old child. When will our grandchild be born? I want to hold a baby who looks like Pete as soon as possible. Eventually, she said even worse things. Hey, FIA, why don't you go to the hospital? Maybe the reason you can't get pregnant is because there's something wrong with your body? We should have checked that before the marriage. If you were infertile, I wouldn't have let you marry. That's incredibly rude. I'm not just a tool to produce your grandchild. I talked to my husband, but it was like talking to a wall.
Well, it's your fault for not getting pregnant, isn't it? Can you even call yourself a wife?
Recently, my relationship with my husband has also been strained. He always sides with his mother and never empathizes with my concerns. But maybe there's something wrong with my body. I began to think that way and finally went to a gynecologist for a checkup. The results showed no issues. But that made me wonder if my husband might have a problem. So, I decided to suggest a checkup to him. Hey, I went to the gynecologist to see if I could get pregnant. The results showed no issues.
So, you can get pregnant then.
That's what it means, but why don't you get checked too? Just in case there's a possibility. If there's no problem with me, there might be something with him. I wanted him to get checked just in case, but he immediately got angry.
What? Are you saying it's my fault? Don't blame me because you can't get pregnant.
I'm not blaming you. But if there's an issue, we should address it early so we can have a baby, right? I want a child too.
Don't be ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with me. I've never had any issues in my health checkups.
Well, they don't check for that in a regular health checkup. But he stubbornly refused to get tested. He even told his mother about it. Then she got angry and glared at me. FIA, how dare you? There's no way Pete has a problem. It's your fault you can't get pregnant. From that day on, every day, I was told, it's your fault. You're a useless infertile woman. Yet, I had to keep trying to have a baby regularly. My heart became more and more troubled. After a while, I started feeling unwell. I felt nauseous and dizzy from the morning. Since it was Sunday, my husband was home, and after preparing lunch for him and his mother, I decided to rest and lay down, but I must have fallen asleep. FIA. Don't sleep in the middle of the day. I was woken up by her voice, and it seemed I had been sleeping for several hours. I still felt nauseous and didn't feel hungry even though it was well past lunchtime. Wait, could this be morning sickness? Now that I think about it, my period hasn't come yet this month. Which means, as I was thinking that, her voice came down from above my head. Hey, FIA, stop daydreaming. It's time to start preparing dinner. Do you think a daughter-in-law who can't even bear a child has the right to nap? At least don't slack off on the housework. I tried to get up, but I still didn't feel well. I'm really not feeling well today. I'm nauseous, and my period hasn't come. It might be morning sickness. I dared to say it. She called my husband. FIA says she might be pregnant. Is that true? And asked him.
There's no way. She hasn't been able to get pregnant for years, so she can't be pregnant now. Don't lie just because you're the reason for the infertility. If you lie, we're getting a divorce. If you're useless, you can leave.
He yelled. Then she added more. That's right. You probably lied about going to the hospital too. Trying to blame Pete. What kind of woman are you? In that moment, I had an epiphany. My husband didn't believe me when I said I was unwell. He even called me a liar. She also called me a useless woman who can't have children. This isn't a family. Divorce, yes, divorce. All right, let's get a divorce. I said that and, even though I felt unwell, I managed to pack my belongings into a Boston bag.
Hey, are you leaving now? What about dinner?
He seemed more worried about dinner than me leaving. She'll come back soon, right? FIA has no family to go back to, so she has nowhere to go. She said. It's true, I had nowhere to go. But I thought leaving was better than staying, so I packed my things silently and left the house. Luckily, I had some savings from when I was working. I wouldn't be homeless for a while. I stayed in a business hotel that night and visited the gynecologist the next day. At that time, I thought if I were pregnant, I would raise the child on my own, but the result was not pregnancy. It seemed stress had temporarily disrupted my hormones. The constant pressure of being called useless and unable to conceive had taken its toll on my body. However, being away from my husband's family helped me sort out my feelings. Later, I got a proper divorce through a lawyer. My husband and his mother thought I was a useless woman who couldn't get pregnant, so the divorce went smoothly. When I called my husband's cell to arrange to pick up my things, his mother answered and said, I threw everything away. Things used by an infertile daughter-in-law are bad luck. I'll get a young wife who can have many children for Pete right away. How horrible. Some of my parents' mementos were among those things. I could hear my husband's laughter in the background. During the marriage, I was made to do all the housework, constantly criticized, and in the end, treated like this. I was completely discarded. But because of that, I decided to live my life with care from now on. A few years later, I unexpectedly ran into my ex-husband and his mother. I was walking in a shopping mall on my day off when I saw them ahead of me. My ex-husband approached me with a surprised look on his face.
What? Are those kids your relatives?
He pointed at the children with me and asked. Long time no see. Is that your first question? I was fed up with his unchanged condescending attitude. But I wasn't the same person anymore. These kids are mine, but why do you ask? I replied calmly.
What? You gave birth to them? You were infertile, so how come you have 3 kids?
Even though there were small children around, he said such things. They must be stepchildren from your new marriage. You didn't have to give birth to have them. She looked at me with disdain and said,
Fi, are you okay? Is something wrong?
A voice called out to me. It was my current husband, Simon. Oh, it's you. I just ran into my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law here. Could you watch the kids for a bit while I talk to them? I asked my current husband.
Sure, but are you okay? Should I stay with you?
He asked with concern. I appreciated his thoughtfulness. Thanks, I'll be fine. I handed the kids over to my current husband and went into a cafe with my ex-husband and his mother. Are you interested in hearing about the children?
Yes. Because it's strange. When we were married, you never got pregnant.
Pete continued angrily. Did you deliberately avoid getting pregnant because you didn't want to have my children? Of course not. You know I was constantly being told by your mother about having children. Back then, I desperately wanted to get pregnant. I said, looking at my former mother-in-law. How dare you speak like that? She glared at me.
Then why do you have 3 children now? It doesn't make sense. They must be your second husband's kids, right? That would make sense.
My ex-husband was trying to convince himself that his theory was correct. My former mother-in-law agreed. That must be it. No, they're all my biological children. I calmly stated the truth.
You're lying. How old are they?
He demanded. Even though it was the first time he met the children, he referred to them dismissively, which I found distasteful. Remaining composed, I replied, 5, 3, and 1. I got pregnant soon after remarrying. We divorced 7 years ago. After that, I had to find a job, but I had no qualifications apart from being a regular office worker before marriage. However, there was one skill I could market: housekeeping. I had acquired cleaning skills and cooking knowledge from living alone and from my former mother-in-law's training. I leveraged these skills to get a job at a housekeeping agency. As I was single at the time, I could work not only during the day but also on night shifts, which were less popular among employees with families. This allowed me to quickly get the hang of the job. Gradually, I built a clientele who specifically requested my services due to my cooking. A year later, someone took notice of my diligent work: Simon, the CEO of the housekeeping agency. Having lost his mother at a young age and taking over household duties himself, he founded the company. He admired my dedication, and we eventually started dating. After getting married, we were blessed with 3 lovely children.
I thought you were infertile.
I quickly responded, "And you? You must have found a wonderful wife and had children by now. Enjoying life, right?"
Well, actually.
He trailed off, hesitating.
Mom said a woman with big hips would bear children, so I married the woman with the biggest hips at a matchmaking party. But she hasn't had any children, and she's lazy and eats all the time. I threw her out.
Really? Why are there so many infertile women in the world? These 2 hadn't changed a bit. Remember, I told you I was fine when I got tested? And I suggested you get tested too. Did you?
Of course not. There's nothing wrong with me.
He declared confidently. Don't try to blame Pete. There's nothing wrong with my son. Their delusion of infallibility was evident. But I knew I wasn't at fault and wasn't useless. I had to make them understand that. Assuming you haven't been tested, right? It's too late for us, but for your future, you should get checked.
Didn't you say something about morning sickness before the divorce? That means the eldest is mine.
He started spouting nonsense. Clearly, he couldn't accept the idea that he might be the problem. That's impossible. Remember the children's ages I told you? They were all born after our divorce. I thought it was morning sickness, but it was stress affecting my hormones. So, I didn't have your child. If there was a problem, it was with you, so get tested.
There's no way.
As he continued to shout, I turned to my former mother-in-law. Your son should get tested. There could be an underlying health issue. Don't you want to hold a grandchild someday? Ensure he's healthy and find him a good match. Humph. But if he's sick, it's a problem. Pete, let's get you tested. If there's no issue, we can refute her claims. They left with those words. Later, Pete called.
Hey. I got tested like you said, and they told me I'm not fertile.
He sounded upset. See? I told you it wasn't my problem.
What should I do?
For some reason, he sought advice from his ex-wife. Why are you asking me? We're divorced. We have no connection.
But my mom is mad at me every day for not giving her a grandchild. She never used to yell at me.
He sounded like he was about to cry. I had faced that pressure and told him, but he ignored me. Now, he was experiencing it himself. I calmly replied, "That's not my concern. See a doctor and deal with it. Don't call me again." I hung up. Through the grapevine, I heard Pete became a shut-in and stopped going to work. Likely, the cause was his mother. She must have continuously blamed him for the lack of grandchildren, and realizing he was infertile, he fell into depression. His mother, thinking her son was flawless, directed her frustration at him. Meanwhile, Pete, always following his mother's orders, had never faced her wrath until now. The shock of being blamed for the first time at his age must have shattered his mental state. Pitiful. I was glad to have left that family. If I had stayed, I would have been worn out, both physically and mentally. Now, Pete was the one suffering, paying for betraying me and siding with his mother. As for me, I enjoy a happy life surrounded by my lovely children. Parenting is tough and tiring, and there are many challenges. I often lack sleep and feel irritated. But my supportive husband is always there for me, and my children's smiles heal me. We'll continue to raise our adorable children together. How did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.